Some days, the world seems to be drowning in a sea of problems. Tax and accounting scandals are causing unrest, in the markets and in the living rooms. Pandemics and other crises threaten the global economy, and climate change endangers our livelihood. It's all over the news. In movies, only superheroes can save the day. But what about real life? Do superheroes really exist? One that is often summoned to solve the problems of our time is transparency. Transparency is supposed to make companies act more sustainably. Certain companies need to disclose how much CO2 they emit and what they're doing to reduce their ecological footprint. This is supposed to increase public pressure on them because anyone who cuts a bad figure fears being punished by investors and customers. Transparency should help prevent tax dumping. Global companies must disclose how much profit they generate in each operating country. This should prevent them from shifting profits to tax havens. But even supposed superheroes cannot be trusted blindly. That is why the Collaborative Research Center, Accounting for Transparency, investigates how transparency works and how information must be prepared for this purpose. The researchers are investigating, for example, whether investors are more likely to buy a private company if it is more transparent, or whether banks grant more loans to sustainable companies when they must disclose their climate risk. That means when banks must state how likely it is that their clients will fail to pay off their loans due to climate change effects. The researchers also examine whether more transparency leads to companies paying their taxes in those countries where they actually operate and not in tax havens. It turns out transparency alone is not always enough. Sometimes it must form alliances. The international distribution of the tax pie, for example, is difficult. It is not enough for the authorities to have all the information they need to calculate taxes correctly. Countries that receive more taxes without transparent information must also be willing to forego them. This requires more than just transparency. For example, procedures that help settle such disputes. Transparency can also have undesirable side effects. Collecting and processing information can be expensive. To offset these costs, companies could decide to cut jobs or cancel important investments. Information can also be misinterpreted and lead to false accusations, or can be exploited by other firms and become a competitive disadvantage. That's why it matters what information is published and how. If we read that a kilo of minced meat produces 44 kilograms of CO2 equivalent, we may not know what to do with this information. But if a red traffic light warns us of the high environmental cost of these emissions, we are more inclined to change our consumption behavior. For companies, there are not always clear and uniform guidelines on how to publish information. As a result, the information is sometimes opaque to investors and consumers. There is also a lack of metrics that determine how much a company's behavior harms the environment, or to what extent a firm is impacted by climate change. The researchers therefore develop models that provide reliable information and predictions. And they develop models that help guide important decisions. For example, they clarify when it's worthwhile to invest in renewable energy. The researchers are also investigating what happens in the absence of transparency. For example, extensive legislative changes, complex regulations, and imprecise wording make the tax system opaque. This can lead to companies and citizens misjudging their tax burden. As a result, they can make decisions on investments or the next election that miss their intended target. Or take the COVID-19 pandemic, which has led to more people working from home. This presents managers with new challenges. They can only motivate employees working from home via video call rather than in person, and they can only observe their employees' activities to a limited extent. This loss of transparency must be accounted for. The researchers are therefore investigating how working from home affects the management controls of teams and employees in the long term. Transparency may not be the classic superhero, nor is it infallible. But transparency research can show how to shape and use transparency to effectively combat the problems of our time.